Tuesday afternoon, it's 4 p.m. in Central Europe and it's Space Café WebTalk time. Our Space Café today, 33 minutes with Meidad Pariente will begin soon. Thanks for joining us for our talk today about walking amongst giants, the challenges of the private space sector in Israel, working in a country with massive defense companies. As always, we appreciate your participation and your ongoing feedback. SpaceWatch.Global is a Europe-based online platform for information in and about space and new space activities in a geopolitical context. And I would like to thank, first of all, our private and corporate supporters that showed their commitment to keeping our independent journalism alive. We really appreciate that. And I know many of you are already familiar with our website, the bi-weekly and daily newsletters, and the Space Café podcast. The latest one features Moriba Jah, and it's another outstanding talk with one of the rock stars our industry has. So, and more to come tomorrow if we are good. We also have new exciting episodes in the Space Café radio, for instance, with Pascal Ehrenfreund and with Christy Iacomini. Also here we have a huge backlog, so more to come. Last point, we also keep our fan shop open online for you to support us actively to become a space watcher. And if you missed any of the previous web talks, we have an archive available on our website in the event section and on YouTube. So, I would call my guest with the highest respect a badass in our industry. And sorry for that. Someone that learned space from the beginning and always challenged himself to the next level. I'm really honored that he followed my invitation. With that, Meidad Pariente, welcome to our Space Café today. So
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Let's introduce you a bit of your background to our audience. So Meidad is an entrepreneur and innovator with more than 25 years of experience in managing technologies. He is the CTO and co-founder of SPACECIALIST and the CIO and co-founder of Sky and Space company. Before, he was the CTO and co-founder of Effective Space Solutions, and if you doesn't know that, they got acquired by Astroscale Israel, or it's renamed into Astroscale Israel and is part of Astroscale. Meidad advises space insurance companies and led several multidisciplinary programs for ImageSat International, Elbit Space Division, the Technion and Rafael. He was the technical lead and IT manager for GACHI-FAT-1, the first Israeli nanosat. And in the past, he worked at MBT-Space as a satellite operator, system engineer, chief system engineer, and chief architect for several communications and Earth observation satellites. During his career at IAI, the Israel Aerospace Industries, Meidad won 7 business improvement awards and 2 outstanding performance awards. He is also an experienced director and board member. And that we can go on, but we just have 33 minutes today. So welcome, Meidad, to our Space Café again.
Thank you very much. It's my honor.
We heard a bit about your CV, but what is your story behind that? I mean, why space and not football?
How do you know that, Thorsten? It's not in my LinkedIn.
Because I'm German and we love football, 4 stars.
Yeah.
No, remember that.
Of course, of course. Well, yeah, funny story. I almost became a professional football player during my junior year in the university. My coach, which was one of the legendary football players in Israel, wanted me to drop my university studies and go and join Maccabi Tel Aviv. But I was young and stupid, and the thought of me going to my mom and telling her, hey, I'm no longer a physics student, I'm going to be a football player, stopped me in place. And then good karma just brought me to the right place in the right time, and I joined the first ever group of students that were recruited to operate the first Israeli communication satellite, Amos, and for 24/7 shifts. and I got struck by the space bug and couldn't stop thinking about space. And as you mentioned, I started as a satellite operator, but built my way in IAI, all the way to be chief systems engineer, and then worked down from 5.5-ton satellites to 860 ground satellites. So kind of a reverse pyramid. I started with old space, large satellites, and then went down to smaller and smaller and smaller satellites until I decided in 2010 that it's time that Israel will have a prosperous civilian communication and general prosperous space private sector, established the first Israeli full private company dealing with new space, and it was a challenge.
Absolutely, and we go into it a bit later, but to give us that are not in Israel an overview, can you give us a short historic overview of Israel's space, how it all started, and before we go into the future? Yeah.
The first ever act related to space in Israel was made by a dreamer and an innovator, maybe you heard of him, called Shimon Peres, who was the prime minister and later on the president of Israel, who actively enlisted Israel into the ITU in order to reserve a slot for a geostationary satellite. 4 West, very good spot over the entire Middle East, Europe, the eastern coast of the US, without really knowing what to do with it. And then came the peace treaty with Egypt. And in 1982, Israel withdrew from the Sinai Desert, 2/3 of the country. It was a strategic decision. And then the Ministry of Defense had a real need to have eyes in the sky. So the first ever space project in Israel was due to security and safety reasons. The OFEC was the first line of Earth observation satellites, and the Shavit was the first launcher. Israel in 1988 became the 8th country in the world that possessed the ability to build, launch, and operate its own spacecraft. And due to our very nice neighborhood, a very welcoming neighborhood, we are the only country in the world that actually launches westward instead of eastward. And we are losing about 30% of the launcher capability due to the fact that we do not want to launch Israeli satellites in regions that they might harm or endanger other people. So that was the beginning of the Israeli space industry. And later on, in 1996, the first Israeli communication satellite was launched, Amos. It was a very inspirational project because it was launched as a secondary payload, and it was the first ever geostationary satellite that weighed less than 1 ton. And it cost an arm and a leg to build this satellite. And later on, the industry developed mainly by the needs of the government and the Ministry of Defense. Later on, Spacecom was the commercial branch of the Amos satellites. It was owned by IAI, and ImageSat was the commercial version of the OFEC program using Eros satellites, which are exactly the same, selling images to customers. Both started as subsidiaries of IAI, and now they are both public companies within the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange. So that was the beginning of the Israeli space industry from a defense need.
So are you still launching satellites from Israel these days? Because I can't remember the last one.
The last one was a few years ago, but yes, every few years, one might say between 3 to 5 years, there's a launch from Israel. Other Israeli satellites were launched from other places, from India, from Russia, from Kourou. But still the Ministry of Defense satellites are launched from Israel.
Okay, got it. I mean, Israel today is considered for the most of us as the startup nation, the space nation. So how did the private space companies in Israel get a chance to enter the market at all? I mean, you said there were spin-offs, but there's a difference between becoming a spin-off of an or an outsourcing of an or a government body and start your own one. I mean, it's two pairs of shoes.
Yes, that's true. And let's start from the top. Today, if I'm not mistaken, there are more than 30 private space companies in Israel. But just 12 years ago, as I mentioned, there were none, zero. And there was no need or market for private space companies, mainly due to the fact that space was still pretty much government owned. And we're talking about large projects. New Space just started. I remember when I first introduced, together with a group of crazy people, we established the Israeli Nanosatellite Association back in 2006. And wherever we went, they just brushed us and waved us and said, toys for boys. Nothing will come from nanosatellites. Don't waste our time. So it was very, very difficult. You mentioned that Israel is the startup nation. That's true. However, in the space industry, we kind of lagging back, especially if I'm talking about what is happening in Europe and in Asia and even in South America. And now we're trying to close the gap, bridge the gap. It's very difficult to be a space company in Israel due to many, many reasons. And as the topic of the Space Cafe indicates, walking among giants, you need to be either very loud, so people will notice you, or you have to be very, very unique. Otherwise, you have no chance.
I see. So when did New Space enter the Israeli market, and how did the giants, the established player, responded?
Oh,
I mean, one thing you said, ignorance, the alliance, but I'm doubt that's not all.
Well, first they ignore you, then they say that you are a sham, and then they try to block you. So the first years, all these giants did everything they can in order to stop any kind of innovation. It was very, very difficult. The fact that the first ever Israeli nanosatellite was not built at IAI or Rafael or Elbit, it was built in a high school in Herzliya with high school kids. And the budget came from the municipality because the mayor really believed in this. Just tell you how difficult it was. But the success of the first Israeli nanosatellite actually opened the door, and it really became a flood. And now we already have a legacy of more than a couple of dozens of Israeli nanosatellites from the academia. Just imagine how universities felt when they discovered that high school kids can build satellites, and they are still contemplating whether it's achievable or not. So it gave the boost to the Ben Gurion University, Tel Aviv University, the Technion, and many other institutes, and also the industries. Some industries that decided they don't want to deal with space, so they realized that it's actually good business. and it's achievable. You know, there's a aura of being a space project in this and space engineering that if you are not NASA or IAI, you cannot do that. You have this glass ceiling, and it's actually not true. After you learn the disciplines of space, it's not different from any other technology project.
I see. Mark had an interesting question, and I'm quite sure you expected that. So how do you handle the dual use or topics, problems he mentioned here, or Israel? So how open are
Yes, that's a very good question, and this is why when we established SPACECIALIST in our vision, we wrote to promote a civilian, prosperous space industry. We know that Israel as a country is always perceived as a dual use. So we focused on pure civilian applications. And there are a lot of pure civilian applications that really can enjoy the fact that space is now available for everybody. And you see that through the type of companies that started in Israel. If you take, for example, we'll touch on that later on, but there is a possibility to separate between the commercial entities and needs and the defense and homeland security needs.
Okay. So coming back to the current market you just described, or you started to describe, yeah. I'm still looking for this secret sauce of success that you guys have in Israel. I mean, obviously, everything many things you touch are getting into gold.
Yes, I think it might sound crazy, but just hear me out. I think the secret sauce in Israel is lack of structure.
Don't tell it to a German. Oh,
the lack of structure and lack of mode of operation is kind of fluid. And let me explain with an example. If I have a good idea, I think it's a good idea, I will bring it to my superior. And in most countries in the world, if my superior will say that's a bad idea or not now, that's it. I will wait for my next opportunity. In Israel, most of the innovative people will say, well, I have my superior. He is not the smartest cookie in the jar. I will go to his superior. And if his superior will say that that's not a good idea, I will go to the CEO. And I will barge in and I will say, hey, I can make you some money. This is the best idea you'll ever hear. And if he will throw me through the window, I will go and establish my own company. In Israel, the day-to-day life is constant problem solving. So I think it's in our DNA, the lack of structure and the fact that we are expected to solve problems and not throw money at the problem because we don't have money to throw on the problem, really help us to never give up and never get a no as an answer.
Interesting. Where does the money comes from?
Oh,
goes into the
into
the company. I know. Ouch. I mean, you know, it also correlates with the question from Andre that he sent in the Q&A. Thanks for that. So,
funny enough, to the space sector in Israel, the VCs are capital. They are not venture. About 10% of new space companies in Israel were funded by Israeli money. Everything else came from Asia, Europe, and the US. Unlike other sectors in the country, for example, cyber or biomed and fintech, that the VCs and hedge funds in Israel invest a lot. Even the institutional investors invest a lot. In Israel, space companies have to go outside because most VCs will invest in you if you have commitments from customers for 10 million or more. But if I have commitments from customers for 10 millions or more, I don't need money. I can just go to the bank. So it's a challenge. It's starting to shift. In the last 2 years, there were 2 investments in space companies. And as I mentioned, ImageSat went public. So it's a publicly listed company. But it seems like the Israeli investors, because they know everything and they don't know space, don't really like to invest in space.
I see. But you do have a number of accelerator programs that fostering this market. Is that correct?
Yes, yes, that's true. But you know, proof of concept for a space program, it's not 500K. It's not like writing software. You need at least 2-3 million, especially if you want in-orbit demonstration. And 12 to 18 months, 2 to 3 million. These accelerators, so far, they don't really give you enough funding in order to go all the way to a proof of concept of a product. So sometimes it helps. I think every dollar counts. So 500K is a lot, especially if you are newcomers or you just graduated from the university and you have an idea. It's better to have support with experienced engineers that will guide you, or project managers. But nevertheless, the country, as I see it, need to invest at least tenfold more in ideas in order to become a really spacefaring country.
I see. Okay, you see that's the self-image and the image from the outside might differ. So, but what are the space companies in Israel that we all should follow these days?
And I will start with a disclaimer. There are a lot of great space companies, so please don't shoot the messenger. But there are some few that really I would like to highlight because they found a niche market which is kind of unique. Space Pharma is one of them, a company that promotes tiny labs for zero gravity testing, both for the medical world and chemical world, even growing crystals. That's amazing. I learned so much sitting with the Space Pharma's team. Ramon Space, that develop innovative and high performance computers for deep space missions. And now they are planning to expand to overall payloads. NSLCom develop an innovative idea of expandable antennas with accurately pointing feed to change the shape of the communication beam on ground. That's a cool idea. And there are also several companies that currently start to think about Moon and Mars. So that's cool. I will mention Helios, that developed an innovative way of generating oxygen from the moon's regolith. And hopefully in few short years, they will demonstrate their innovative system on the moon. And
on Parachute 2? On Parachute 2? On this mission?
And I think it maybe Jonathan is here and he will elaborate. I think they plan to launch with the iSpace on one of the Artemis launches.
Okay, cool. just a remark here, obviously, from Avi Brown saying Israel is equal out-of-the-box thinking. That's what we heard from you. And a question from
There
Jay.
is no box.
So it's an out-of-the-box thinking in the absence of a box.
It's thinking that there is no box, and then going straight 120 miles per hour to the wall.
It sounds that we are on the Schrödinger track right now, but
yeah, exactly.
So Jay asks, do you think that the large companies' opportunities to smaller startups is typical in other countries also? And do you have any recommendation for how large organization could operate with more flexibility and agility? Thanks for those questions.
Yeah, great question. Well, I think if we take the US for an example, which also has a very dominant aerospace and defense industry, I think the difference is the NASA project. NASA is very powerful space agency, and they, as part of their thinking, they are promoting these small companies. They have a lot of programs that are specifically dedicated for small companies. So you have your Boeings and your Raytheon, but there is place for other companies. Regarding what large companies or industries could do, I think the best way to promote the small companies is by investing in them. So daughter companies or subsidiaries holding up to 30% will give you the benefit of if this technology succeeds, you can incorporate it in your projects. And in parallel, let startups be startups and not burden them with all the red tape of large companies. So the best thing, as I see it, is for each large industry to invest, I don't know, 10 to 20% of the annual runover in supporting new companies that could really make the difference.
Cool. What are the next steps in Israel's space on Israel's space agenda? I mean, what will come out of Rakia mission, or potentially then Bereshit 2, or any other private project? I think with Rakia, you set pretty high standards are now what we can expect from a private future in space.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that there are already some major achievements from the Rakia mission, new technologies that were proven in space. The first that comes into mind is building lenses, dynamic lenses in space that will be used by astronauts and space tourists and optical equipment. So many of these experiments have commercial possibilities. As I see it, and I ask my colleagues here in Israel, where do you see the industry in 5 and 10 years? It seems like Israel will be less focused on manufacturing hardware and more focused on holistic and software-based solutions and applications. We do think that since we did such a tremendous work of bringing agriculture to deserts and just turning the country into a large greenhouse, we could bring these technologies and experience to Moon and then even to Mars. Somebody from the Romanian space agency once told me that if Israel had 5% of NASA's budget, there will already be greenhouses on the Moon growing wheat. And I fully agree. So I think we'll see innovative applications and ideas less hardware manufacturing, more integration of hardware being built anywhere in the world and being assembled into a mission, and maybe even the AI, which is very strong here, will be dominant in the Israeli space projects in the upcoming years.
Interesting. An interesting question from Chris. With the civilian market, is export control easier, question mark, or do you still have some countries restricted for whatever reasons?
Do you remember I told you that the first Israeli nanosatellite was built by high school kids? Well, the principal of this high school was forced to be registered as a defense export. So the export license in Israel is so restricted, it's very difficult. It followed the US rules, and then the US rules changed and everything commercial went from defense to Ministry of Commerce. But in Israel, it stayed. In Israel, everything that smells like space should be controlled, and it is controlled. And it's a challenge. It's very difficult to train bureaucrats to think differently. So hopefully somebody is listening and it will change. But currently, it's a pain in the neck. Nothing less.
I see. So it means it's very hard to smuggle your nanosat then to an Indian launcher. So
well, a nanosat you can carry in your bag, but then you'll have to prepare your family to send you cigarettes to the brig, because when you'll come back, you'll be arrested.
I see. Let's keep the best to the last moment in our talk today. The announcement that you will be our host for the upcoming Space Café Israel series, and we're very honored by having you on board. So what is your idea? Who can be expected as your guests? I think you had some ideas already.
Yes.
And shoot high. I mean.
Well, I would like the world to get to know the Israeli space entrepreneurs. So we're going to talk with founders. We're going to talk with CEOs. We're going to grill some VCs guys and understand why they don't invest in space, and what are the barriers. Maybe we'll convince also the head of the space agency to come and speak about his vision. And hopefully we'll get a politician, because there's something that I really need to clear. Israel is one of the only Western countries that doesn't have a space policy. Never in our history a prime minister or any high-ranked politician spoke in the Knesset about what's Israel's vision for space in 5 years, 10 years, or something like that. So hopefully I could secure a high-ranked politician also, but it will be interesting. So hang out to the seats. It's going to be a fun ride.
We are looking forward to hear more from your fantastic country. And hey, welcome to the club of
Thank you very much.
Countries.
My pleasure.
Yeah, but also welcome to the club of a country for not having a space strategy and not a space law. So.
Okay.
But we are working on that as well. So thank you very much for being our guest today. And I'm handing back to Lisbon. So Chiara, back to you.
Thank you so much. Yes, and thank you, Meidad, so much for this great talk. I'm also really looking forward to the Space Café Israel, so let's get that started as soon as possible. Speaking of next events, we do have a list of exciting upcoming events for you. So actually this week, on Thursday, on the 9th of June, we have our next Moriba's Vox Populi with Professor Moriba Jah on the question of who gets the orbital right-of-way. So stay tuned for that. Then on the 14th of June, we have our 33 minutes with Jennifer Manor of EchoStar. On the 17th of June, we'll have our next Space Café Scotland by the wonderful Angela Matisse. And on the 21st of June, our next 33 minutes with Dr. Deganit Parkovsky. Then on the 24th, the 25th, and the 26th of June, we have something very exciting happening because SpaceWatch.Global will be at the ILA Berlin Air Show. We will have a Space Café Germany and a Space Café Young Global Talents live on the stage. So more information.
We have two Space Café Germanys.
Yes, even better. So definitely stay tuned for more news there. And on the 28th of June, we'll have our 33 minutes with Graham Turnock. All our events are going to be online on Eventbrite. So yeah, we hope to see you there soon. As always, we love to hear your feedback. So please check in with us on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Don't forget to sign up for our daily or our bi-weekly newsletters. And if you want to treat yourselves to something special, become a Space Watcher today or help us out in the Supporter program. Again, a huge thank you to Meidad for this inspiring and informing talk and for being our guest today. And thanks again to the entire team behind the scenes for doing this great job week in and week out. I hope that you all stay safe and stay healthy. Again, thank you for joining us. Thank you for asking so many questions. I hope to see you later on this week and in the next weeks. And in the meantime, visit our website, follow us on social media, and don't forget, become a Space Watcher. Thank you.